On January 4th of 2015, police were called to the scene of something gruesome that happened in a Manhattan apartment. A very wealthy hedge fund manager was dead, and it was immediately known who was responsible and why. This is the entitled case of Thomas Gilbert Jr. Hello, friend, and welcome to High Time Crime. My name's Joel, and on here I specialize in true crime and also mechanic work. If you need someone to fix your car, I'm your go-to guy.
Oh, the wheel fell off. Oh, Jesus. God damn.
But anyways, today we're going over the case of a spoiled man-child named Thomas Gilbert Jr. You're going to learn about how awful of a person he is and, well, what he did to his father. For our story, we're heading to Manhattan, New York. With a population of around 1.6 million people as of 2020, it's home to some of the country's most iconic places and the most populated of one of 5 boroughs in New York City. Originally forming in the early 1600s, what the borough is today is much different. If you ever happen to crash land here after your jetpack randomly fails, well, you got a bunch of options for places to go. You could visit the Empire State Building, which is a 102-story skyscraper that was designed from 1930 to 1931. Its name is derived from Empire State, which is the nickname for New York State. You could head on down to the Statue of Liberty, which is a neoclassical sculpture on Liberty Island, a classic sight. Last but not least, you could take a little trip to Central Park, which is an urban park in New York City. There's a bunch of beautiful sights, including some really nice gardens, so the smells are probably superb. But none of these options are the reason as to why we're in Manhattan today. Thomas Strong Gilbert Sr. was born on January 1st of 1945 to Abner and Maybelle Gilbert. He had an older brother named Beckwith, and they lived a life of luxury growing up in Manhattan. The family was considered to be a part of the elites and very well off. Thomas went to the Buckley School, which is a private kindergarten to 9th grade school that is all exclusive. The cost of tuition per year is $55,000 nowadays, so just imagine what it was during that time. After graduating from Buckley in 1958, Thomas then went to Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. This was a 9th to 12th grade boarding school that was once again very exclusive. The cost of tuition per year here is $66,000 in 2023, so once again, imagine what it was then. While Thomas was going to Phillips Academy, he was awarded the Butler Thwing Academic Award during his freshman year because he was the student with the highest entering academic accomplishments. He also played soccer, squash, and tennis, and during his course here, he made the honor roll 4 years in a row. By the time that Thomas was a senior, he was 6'6", had a great sense of humor, everyone around him loved him, and a lot of his friends referred to him as Gilbo or Trunk. After graduating from Phillips Academy in 1962, Thomas then went to the same school that his brother was at, or Princeton. It was here that Thomas joined the Colonial Club, which is a private social club for undergraduates. He also played varsity, squash, tennis, and soccer. Eventually, Thomas graduated from Princeton in 1966 with a bachelor's degree in public and international affairs. After this, he would go to, yep, you guessed it, Harvard Business School. While Thomas was attending Harvard from 1966 to 1968, he won the HBS squash tournament and achieved a master's degree in finance and general management. Soon, he would start working on Wall Street as a financial consultant, and one thing led to another, and he became even more wealthy. For about 12 years, Thomas was just living a single life until he met Shelley Ray at a dance party in Manhattan in late 1980. Only a few months later, in early 1981, Thomas proposed to Shelley. By September 26th of 1981, they got married and they waited to have kids. The couple decided to get a mansion in upstate New York, and now it was time to have some kids. In 1984, they would have Thomas Gilbert Jr., and in 1989, they'd have another baby, this time a girl named Claire. We'll get into the children, specifically Thomas Jr., here shortly, but we still have to talk about what Thomas Sr. was able to accomplish. First, his wife Shelley was working at a multinational investment bank and finances company when she ended up quitting to become a stay-at-home mom. From April of 1984 to June of 1991, Thomas was the managing director for a private equity fund, and typically he'd act as a director and/or senior financial advisor to the portfolio company after closing. In 1998, Thomas and his brother Beckwith decided to open a company together called Knowledge Delivery Systems. This was a provider of online teacher education with programs in over 36 states, helping teachers get degrees and also to develop. Thomas was the chairman and CEO for 10 years, but in January of 2011, stepped down and became the director of the company. In January of 2010 until March of 2011, he co-founded and was also the managing director of a biotechnology private equity fund. In April of 2011, Thomas took $500,000 of his own money and launched a hedge fund called Wainscott Capital Partners. It was named after the Hamptons town where he owned a home. This company specialized in biotechnology and healthcare stocks, with only some of the highest class of people being able to invest into it. Thomas was very serious about this company, working up to 12 hours a day, rarely ever taking vacations or breaks. He was hoping to grow it to $1 billion fund, but that didn't exactly happen. Now, while the company did grow to be over $7 million, it was reported as being worth over $200 million, and I really do think people looked at the Gilberts in a higher light than what they were actually worth. They did roam around with the elites, spending time in the most luxurious of places, but what went on behind the scenes was certainly different. By 2015, Thomas Sr. and his wife Shelley had moved into a smaller home, and the property that they owned in the Hamptons they listed for $11.5 million. Thomas Sr. had less than $20,000 in cash, about $10,000 in stocks and bonds, and about $500,000 in other assets. So by all accounts, money was getting tighter for the Gilberts, and this was the biggest issue for their son, Thomas Jr., or Tommy. It's now time to talk about who he was, what footsteps he followed, and where he ended up. On July 13th of 1984, Thomas Strong Gilbert Jr. was born. Before he could talk, he was interested in numbers and appeared to be a very bright child. When Tommy was young, his father would play with him, teaching him the game of baseball. In 1989, Tommy was scheduled to take a test to get into Buckley's nursery school, a precursor to the Buckley School that's grades K through 12. Tommy got a near perfect score and was allowed into the class, and at this time, the tuition costs were nearly $30,000 a year, so cheap? No. He would continue his schooling at Buckley for years to come, and his father, Thomas, played a huge role in his life. Every September, the school had a father-son camping trip, and Thomas went every time. On January 1st of 1993, or New Year's Day, or Thomas's birthday, Tommy gave his dad a World's Greatest Father trophy, and Thomas was very appreciative of this. Little Tommy would really have a great life, and the amount of things that he was allowed to do because of his father was near limitless. One of those things included being sent to a NASA space camp where he would spend 5 days learning how to be an astronaut. Tommy also went on vacations left and right. He was very spoiled, and as he would get older, he started to develop problems. By the time that he was in middle school, he started playing football and was the team captain and starting running back. He was considered to be quiet and reserved, but some people said that he could be cocky and a risk taker. While on the football team, Tommy met a good friend named Peter Smith Jr., who comes into play a little bit later for some interesting reasons. But in middle school, specifically 6th grade, something happened to Tommy while he was on a bus ride. He was sitting with a friend, that friend was listening to music, and all of a sudden, Tommy started to not feel like himself. From this point forward, he'd start having multiple dreams about his father being abusive to him, though Tom appeared to be a good father. When Tommy got to the 7th grade, he started to drink and smoke the good green. Somehow, Thomas found out about this and called the Buckley School principal and talked about it. This made Tommy furious. When high school came around, Tommy was a straight-A student with a 140 IQ, a great athlete, a student council member, and was overall just very bright. In the 9th grade, he started bullying people and vandalizing walls. After school, he'd hang out with friends and smoke. Tommy would party on Friday and Saturday nights, and this was something that would continue through his college years and 20s. During the summer of his teen years, he'd also go to the Hamptons and stay at his parents' home there. It was here he worked as a lifeguard. He saved several people's lives over the course of 4 years and really got into surfing. By June of 2000, Tommy graduated from Buckley, winning an award because of his grades, and then from 10th to 12th grade, he'd go to Deerfield Academy, which was in Massachusetts, and at this time costed nearly $50,000 to attend every year. Tommy played basketball, baseball, football, and also competed in cross country. He started studying Chinese, excelled at that, and became fluent in Mandarin, and grew to be a 6'3" guy who people looked at with respect. But around this time, Tommy started to experience more mental problems, kind of starting around the time he became a lifeguard. He began to become more agitated, less fun to be around, and overall very serious, experiencing pretty extreme bouts of depression. His family and friends picked up on this right away, and they wanted Tommy to go see a psychiatrist, but he refused and was angry that they'd even suggest that. In 12th grade, Tommy was getting ready to graduate, and Thomas wanted him to follow in his footsteps and go to Princeton. In the application Tommy sent to the college, he wrote about his depression and how he conquered it. He was obviously lying. In 2003, he graduated from Deerfield with excellent grades, but he became extremely paranoid. Tommy began to think that everything he wore at Deerfield had bugs, and so he had to get rid of all of his clothing. He began to believe that people were trying to steal his soul, and so he started coming up with rituals to protect himself. It was clear that Tommy was starting to go down a dark path. He was easily able to get into Princeton because of his father, and he was just getting worse by each passing day. In his freshman year, Tommy was doing all types of drugs. He was playing football for the college and taking steroids to be better. Sometime during this year, he got caught doing all of these things and was also caught with software to hack into other students' computers. As to what that was for, not sure. But because of this, Tommy was placed on academic probation. When this happened, he decided to just go to South Carolina for a surfing vacation. But this was just so he didn't have to deal with his dad. Thomas was very alarmed by Tommy's suspension, and he began to reach out to psychiatrists for help with his son and wife. Thomas told the doctors that Tommy and Shelley would gang up on him when he went against Tommy's behavior, and that he felt ostracized. When Shelley talked to the psychiatrist, she claimed that there was nothing wrong with Tommy. In 2004, Tommy began going to a psychiatrist, and he was prescribed with an antipsychotic drug. On November 29th of this same year, Tommy had a meltdown at the doctor's office, complaining that he hadn't talked to anyone for weeks except doctors and cab drivers, and that he feels out of control. He would continue to have inpatient and outpatient treatment for the next several years, with more mental problems arising. Tommy wasn't consistent with his appointments though, and would rarely go and never pick up the phone. His struggles were very severe, dealing with restless nights, staying up for days on end. At the same time though, Tommy was also living a great life. His parents were paying every single bill that he could possibly have, while he was just racking up charges left and right. He visited South America, Africa, and Brazil to go on surfing vacations. By 2006, Tommy was 22 years old and returned to Princeton after taking the previous year off due to mental health problems. He eventually graduated from Princeton with honors and majored in economics, but that's a little bit down the line. Before that, he started to see another psychiatrist, and this time he was diagnosed with a ton of things, and so we get a pretty good look inside of his mind. Tommy potentially had Lyme disease. He had Tourette syndrome. He had OCD, ADD, and hyperactivity. He was then prescribed a bunch of medication. On Sunday, May 6th of 2007, Tommy decided to spend a weekend doing mushrooms, coke, and a bunch of other drugs. On Tuesday, May 8th, he called 911 and told the dispatcher that he was overdosing. By the time the police got there, they found him on the ground, conscious, but he was very far gone. He was agitated and wouldn't speak to anyone, and so the rescue team sent him to a hospital. On Wednesday, May 9th, the next day, Tommy became uncooperative at the hospital and attacked a 53-year-old nurse and headbutted her multiple times, knocking her down to the floor. The police then went to the hospital, but Tommy had been discharged. I don't know who allowed that, but then the police went and found him, and he was charged with aggravated assault. He eventually went to court and agreed to probation and supervisory treatment, and about 15 months later, in September of 2009, all of his charges were dismissed. Tommy was just getting worse by each passing moment. By 2012, Tommy was in his late 20s, wasn't really doing anything with his life, and pretended that he was successful. He hung out with people who were, going to many parties and charity events with socialites, sporting the idea, but that was just a facade. One of those friends Tommy hung out with was a guy named Peter Smith Jr., and Tommy really liked hanging out with him and Peter's girlfriend. Peter's someone that Tommy used. We'll talk about that soon. Tommy's parents, though, were paying for him to live, giving him a monthly allowance, paying his rent. They were doing everything for him in his 20s. Tommy began having some self-ending tendencies and started looking around for a gun. His parents started to rent out their house in the Hamptons, and so Tommy wasn't allowed to use the house any longer. He took it beyond himself to start using his friend Peter's basement to sleep and party with girls. Peter warned him to stop, but Tommy kept doing it. And so Peter got fed up and cut Tommy off. One night in September of 2012, Peter threw a poker party and told everyone not to tell Tommy, but somehow he found out. Tommy showed up and the two of them got into a big argument and Tommy got thrown out. Afterwards, he felt embarrassed and now revenge was on his mind. The next day, Tommy began telling people that Peter was treating his dog terrible, and for a good amount of time, Tommy became obsessed with getting back at Peter. He'd show up to his house unannounced and started doing weird things. Also, in October, Tommy sent a letter to his father basically saying that he's super supportive and he's also been a great dad, but Tommy doesn't want to talk to him anymore. And that if they ever see each other on the street, to politely say hi and just keep it moving. He didn't want anything to do with his father, but Tommy wanted everything to do with his father's money. His dad was giving him nearly $10,000 a month at this point. On October 4th, Tommy went and paid Peter a visit and beat him up, eventually getting arrested for this. This wasn't the end of Tommy's feud with Peter, however. We'll talk about that soon. By 2014, Tommy was still on the loose, racking up bills for his parents to pay, pretending to live a prestigious life, and getting worse mentally. He was still seeing a psychiatrist, a different one, and was diagnosed again, but this time with OCD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and delusional disorder. Tommy went through a series of different girlfriends, but never found what he was looking for. In April of 2014, he needed another place to live after his rent was up in his previous spot, and so his dad began paying $2,300 a month for an apartment and giving him an allowance of $800 a week at first, and also paying everything else he needed. In May of this year, Tommy found a guy on Facebook selling a pistol, and he tried to buy it online, but couldn't. So he then went down to Ohio and bought it himself, illegally. Tommy had been barred from buying a gun in the state of New York due to his mental health problems. Unfortunately, no one knew that he went and bought a gun. Tommy, in late August, decided to confront Peter about being friends again. Peter and his friends were at a bonfire when Tommy approached and tried to get Peter to go walk alone with him on the beach and talk about things. Obviously, Peter didn't want to, and he told Tommy that he couldn't be his friend anymore and he wishes him the best of luck. The next day, Peter called Thomas and told him that Tommy needs to be hospitalized because he's disconnected from reality. Within only a few weeks, on September 15th of 2014, at about 5:35 a.m., a fire broke out at Peter Smith Sr.'s home, Peter's father. A Molotov cocktail was thrown inside of the window. Luckily, no one was home at the time. The police suspected Tommy of doing it. Peter did too, but they couldn't prove definitively that he did it, and so they let him go. He was never charged with this. But this wasn't the end of Tommy's heinous mind or what he was going to do. In the following weeks after the fire, Tommy began looking into the dark web, and specifically websites such as hireakiller.com and other websites where he could hire a hitman. Tommy was planning on either having his father killed or doing it himself. By Sunday, January 4th of 2015, Thomas Gilbert was really getting tired of Tommy and his antics. He decided to lower Tommy's weekly allowance from $400 a week to $300 a week. Originally, it was at $1,000, then went down to $800, then to $600, then so on. The reason that Thomas was lowering Tommy's allowance was because Tommy wouldn't update his dad about what he was doing, his bills, or anything. He wasn't talking to him. Tommy had racked up a bunch of unpaid charges and recently bought a credit card scammer and tried stealing money. Tommy was 30 years old, and he hated the fact that his father was messing with his allowance. Allowance at 30 years old. For some reason, Tommy acted as if he was owed money, as if he deserved to have thousands of dollars given to him every month to fund his drug habits and expensive cost of living. This was the catalyst for what Tommy was about to do next. He packed a duffel bag filled with random items and the gun he recently bought, and decided today was the day that he was going to end his father's life. For Thomas Sr., his Sunday was spent quite well, as most of his were. 3 days before the 4th, on New Year's Day, he turned 70 years old and was a very healthy man. So on Sunday, he played 2 rounds of tennis at the River Club, a social club that costs nearly $10,000 to get in. After Thomas was done, he then went home and watched some football in his bedroom. Shelley, his wife, was in the living room talking to friends on her laptop. At about 3:15 p.m., the doorbell rang, and the both of them were shocked because they weren't expecting any visitors. Shelley opened the front door, and to her surprise, Tommy was there wearing a hoodie, carrying a black gym bag. This was the first time she had seen him in nearly 5 months, and so she was very happy to see him. Tommy said that it was really important that he talk to his father about business. He then walked into the apartment and asked Shelley if his little sister was there, and Shelley told him that she was at church. Tommy then told Shelley that he was hungry and asked her if she could go to the store and buy him a sandwich and a Coke, and that he wanted to talk to his father alone. Shelley was hesitant at first, but agreed to do it as she thought it may be a good thing. Then, about 15 minutes into her journey, she sensed that something was wrong. Immediately, she turned around and went back home. When Shelley got to the door, she listened to try and see if she could hear anything, but it was just silence. Then she started walking up and down the hallway, thinking of what to do. Shelly then unlocked the door and walked inside, but things were eerily quiet. There was no signs of Tommy or Thomas, and Shelly was only gone for about 20 minutes or so. She started yelling out to no response, and so she walked into their bedroom, and Thomas was lying on the ground deceased with a gun on his chest. Shelly immediately knew that it was Tommy responsible, and so she called 911.
911. What's the emergency today, ma'am?
My husband is, I think, dead.
Okay.
Please rush.
Connecting to EMS. Do not hang up, okay?
Hello?
Okay, hello, caller. Ambulance for you or for somebody else?
It's for my husband.
You awake?
He's dead, I think.
Can I ask for a question, Arrow?
What's that?
Can I ask for a question?
Yes.
Hello, ma'am. You said your husband was shot?
Yes.
How long ago?
Probably 10, 15 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago, maybe.
10 minutes ago he was shot?
Maybe 15.
By whom?
My son, who is nuts. But I didn't know he was this nuts.
The police then went to Tommy's apartment and arrested him. The case was cut and dry about what happened and why. Tommy was upset about his allowance being cut and for a long time harbored this terrible energy of believing his father was mean to him, when Tommy himself said the opposite in multiple letters. It would take a little over 4.5 years to finally sentence Tommy to prison for 30 years to life. During the trial, he tried to plead insanity, but that didn't work, and it's quite obvious that within those 4 years, what he did took a huge toll on him. And that's rightfully so. What he did was incredibly heinous and without any warrant. Tommy's father appeared to be a well-liked, respected, good man or father. He really tried his hardest getting Tommy help, giving him all the money he could, sending him to the best possible schools, vacations all over the world, and letting Tommy do pretty much anything he wanted. And in the end, Tommy repaid him with murder. How sickening. Thomas Gilbert Sr. was a hardworking man who was given a rough situation. He had dreams of making his company worth billions, and it definitely could have happened, but unfortunately, he was never afforded that opportunity. I genuinely hope that he's resting peacefully. As for Tommy, well, you can see where his life force went. Jail's gonna keep on rotting him away, and that's for the best. But anyways, thank you for watching this episode of High Time Crime. If true crime is your thing, then please subscribe and hit the like button because that's all we do. I also have a second account with my brother named Horrifying where we tell stories about everything paranormal. This includes true crime, mysteries, and things that are just downright spooky. I'd greatly appreciate if you subscribe to that too. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, friend.